Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole and Matthew Cravat. I am Michael Cole.
And I am Matthew Cravat.
I think we should start off with a couple of disclaimers on this episode. This is going to be our final episode for September. This is going to go out for patrons. It'll go out Monday the 25th. And it'll go out Friday the 29th for everybody else.
For people watching on YouTube, he's looking at the position of the moon outside of his window to judge the date.
No, I have my monitors are blocking my calendar. They're just blocking the last row of the calendar, so I couldn't see the dates. So because it's the last show of September, and September is Suicide Prevention Month, I wanted to do an episode. I am probably going to want to do an episode every year on this topic in September. This is a topic that is, it's weird to say near and dear to my heart, but it is something that I think is important. And I have personal experience with suicidal depression. So we're going to give a quick trigger warning that, like, we're going to be talking about suicide, obviously, and certain things that cause that. It is not in our nature to not joke about things, and to be honest, I joke about things often. That's how I learned how to cope with things, and then I find them funny. I have often, when we've tackled a topic that I thought was more serious, tried to keep the joking to a minimum, or keep the joking more on the subject of asides than the topic itself. So we'll see how it goes with that, obviously. But yes, so tonight's topic is suicide prevention, or suicide in general. Just kind of something that I thought that last year I talked about mental health with Wes, who is a mental health professional, for Suicide Awareness Month. This year, I wanted to maybe tackle the topic a little more directly. It looks like I have shaved right here, but I think it's blonde. It looks like I just did like a with the razor. It's very fucking weird looking.
I mean, it looks like you decided you wanted a little Hitler mustache as a soul patch.
So weird. No, there's hair here. It's just blonde. That's so fucking weird.
Yeah, you need to go get Just for Men and darken your beard.
Or maybe it's blonde for a reason.
It is blonde for a reason, because you're a genetic malfunction.
So anyway, that was my intro to the topic is suicide and kind of all things suicide. So do you have anything you want to start off with before we kind of dive into the bullets that I had laid out for us?
Well, funny you should mention the word bullets, because that's actually, when suicide gets spoken about in my house, often it's in the realm of gun violence, because like in an average year, there's a couple of hundred accidental deaths in America from gun violence.
Yep.
But more than half of gun deaths in America are suicides. Even with mass shootings and murders, they are like, let me look at the last data I had. 2010 was 61% were suicides. So yeah. So and the thing about suicide by gun is it is usually successful. You take a bunch of pills, that can be a cry for help because somebody can come save you. You put a bullet in your mouth, you put a bullet in
your mouth. Yeah. And the thing about suicide by gun is, and I'm sure you know this, but for our listeners, and it's common sense once you've heard it, at least, but it may not be something that comes to mind immediately for people, is it's not necessarily that people who have guns are more likely to try to kill themselves. It's more they just have a better method available to them.
Yeah, they're more successful.
The average person, and I would have to get an actual statistic on how many people, on what percentage of people attempt, but that number doesn't really increase with guns. The success rate increases with guns, because like you said, pills, everything else is a slower process. It's a more reversible process. If you take pills, you can, if you change your mind at a certain point in it, or if someone's nearby and finds you, you go to the hospital.
They throw up because you took too many pills.
They pump your stomach. They give you charcoal. You throw up. If you cut your wrists, it's a slow process, and that gives you time to change your mind. It also gives time for recovery to, whereas a bullet, I mean, people do survive gunshot wounds, and some people survive self-inflicted gunshot wounds, but guns exacerbate the problem. They exacerbate the success rate, not the depression issue. That they're not the underlying issue that causes it. Like, I don't think because you own a gun, you're more likely to be in that mental state at all.
Right. You're more likely to die from suicide, but you're not more likely to attempt suicide.
Right. Yes. Perfect. Exactly. Not perfect, but you understand. Yeah. That's a great way to start us off, I think. I'm pulling up Trello so that I can see my other bullets.
Again with the bullets.
I mean, bullet points. I'm not trying to be insensitive or So I have a rather controversial take to start us off. I think, and that is that I don't inherently see the problem in taking your own life. And I say that not as someone who's obviously trying to encourage it, but I think that we ultimately, and it obviously becomes a different issue when you look at a physical ailment versus a mental, emotional ailment. I think that there's a lot more people who are pro death with dignity when you look at, Parkinson's or not Parkinson's,
terminal disease or extreme old age where you're no longer living a quality of life.
Right.
Those are easy places to
right, and there are more even split, I think, of people that would believe in that. I am in favor of the ability to have death with dignity in depressive cases if there is a long enough term, and I don't know how we define that.
I think the challenge is if your entire life is misery and depression, then maybe that's the same as a terminal disease for you, and you'd rather not be out of pain. But how do you separate that from someone who had a short-term depressive episode and would rather not have killed themselves except for the nadir of that episode?
Right. And to go into my own personal history, I have had suicidal depressive episodes, and I will say when I was in high school, I attempted to slit my wrists, and I had them under faucets so that the water would keep it from healing, so that it would do it.
Clot, it would keep the blood flowing.
Yeah, exactly. At a certain point, I lost.
What you want to do is put your hand in the toilet and flush the toilet because the swirls of vacuum pulls the blood out faster. I looked into this as well.
Is that a true thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
I thought you were.
It's the suction, pulls your blood out in the whirlpool.
I thought you were making some kind of really sick joke.
No, a sick joke. I would say that it pushes the blood back in if you do it south of the equator.
Yes, that is a sick fucking joke. But my point being, so I did that, and I would say that at a certain point, and it was probably 10 minutes of bleeding or less, I got lightheaded and euphoric, and I didn't want to die anymore, and
I felt good because I was lightheaded.
And when and so I went and I got band-aids, and I wore, I was in Catholic school, I wore long sleeve shirts and sweaters for my uniform, so I was easily able to cover up the evidence, right? And so I just kept it bandaged, and in that process, I felt better in the moment, and then I felt better over the next several days. and you know, it's not a healthy way. I don't want to make it sound like I'm endorsing, but there was a release there that I needed, and I didn't have another way of doing it. Now I know therapy. I had never been to a therapist at that point. Now I know to go to therapy and or to go for a run, or there's all kinds of different ways of dealing with depression, medicine, everything. But at that point in my life, I didn't have another option, and it was the release I needed, and it did not. And I'm glad I did not die in that moment. And so I don't want to conflate it with just like, I think anytime you think about suicide, people should be able to do it. I think I'm just a death with dignity person, and I don't think that mental health is different than physical health in certain ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you believe in bodily autonomy, that has to include the right to end your life. The question is it being done in sound mind, in a place where the you of tomorrow would agree with what the you of today is doing,
right,
with no backsies?
Yes, yeah. So anyway, I don't want to get into too much of that. I think we've talked enough about that. I don't want this to be a pro suicide podcast. I genuinely, because I think more often than not, this is anecdotal. More often than not, I would guess that people are likely to have temporary episodes, and we need to get them through that, and we need to build a better something that I think is not up for debate is that we need a better mental health support system in this country, both from a health health insurance standpoint and healthcare standpoint, but also just the way we handle it as far as stigma. And I think that when you take a look at mental health versus physical health, cancer is very obvious, and mental health is not taken as seriously because it's just in your several people will say like, oh, depression is just in your head, and it's like, well, kind of technically that is true, but it is a real thing. Just being in your head doesn't make it
can be completely chemically reliant. You don't have the serotonin levels you're supposed to have it.
Yeah,
like any other illness.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
As I say, I told this story on Embrace the Void podcast, which I'm on this month's episode. I was talking about my experience with philosophy, but I told the story which dovetails to this topic. Was I had a philosophy professor who was from Germany, and he was upset that our class, day one of class, was so large because it had gotten out he was an easy A. So he decided to use me as an example to scare people out of the class. And I had this professor twice before at that point. So he and I already had a relationship, and he knew, who I was, what I was, and how far he can push me. So he suddenly says in class, "Mr. Cravat, please tell the class why you do not kill yourself today." And I was in a place where I was writing death poetry daily, suicide stuff daily, like it was my preoccupation. And I said, "Wolfgang, it would kill my grandparents. They wouldn't be able to handle it. I don't think I have the right to kill them with the shock of killing myself. Like it would be a murder-suicide." I don't know if I had that term back in the 80s, but that was what I expressed in. And he was upset that it did not do well for the philosophical conversation he wanted to have. So he goes, "This is not the answer I wanted, Mr. Cravat. You will play ball with me or to the showers with you." That freaked everybody out. My fraternity brothers were totally freaked out. I was like, he is funny as hell. So what's funny is during that, that time period, I told that story on the phone to a girl I kind of was seeing, who lived in Philadelphia when I was in Brooklyn, and we slept together a couple times. I wasn't really dating her. And it was a Thursday, and she's like, "I'm coming down tomorrow." And she took the train down up from Philly, and we spent the weekend in bed. And she was like, "If you ever feel like you wanted to kill yourself, you call me, and I'll make sure you don't want to feel that way anymore." So that is another good way of feeling good about stuff. Tell a hot chick to come have sex with you for the weekend.
Yeah, I don't feel like that's like a reasonable solution for people. I also feel like it becomes I know that you were half joking, but I also want to say that, like, I think while that offer is nice, it's not a healthy thing for her, because then she's in a state of like you can easily manipulate her if
Yeah,
you're like, oh,
she would be
oh
fine with that too.
well,
Yeah, I'm saying that was
but what I was
our relationship was, but more importantly, the topic I wanted to get into with it was the obligation on your family members, like the fact that killing myself would have killed my grandparents, literally would have killed them. They
yeah,
wouldn't have survived that, but also as parents and spouses,
right,
you have other people that you have taken an obligation to be there for by choosing to marry them, by choosing to procreate and create people. You are taking on an obligation, and so
okay,
you have to, I think, weigh that, as well as it's not just your choice of what you do. Like, yes, it's your choice, ultimately, bodily autonomy, but there are such things as selfish choices too.
sure. All right. I do want to tackle this topic, but before we do, I want to ask you. So, you mentioned that you were writing suicide poetry, and were you suicidal, or was there just a infatuation with the idea or
Preoccupation with suicide. I
preoccupation?
don't know. I have never attempted suicide, but I daydream about it all the time. How nice it would be to tie a noose around my neck and jump off a high thing and snap my neck. That would be lovely, especially when I'm under a lot of stress. I think about it a lot, but I don't
Okay,
plan to do it.
that's odd. So I have those same thoughts, but they are not like they're not just like a little escape. I mean, I've been really working on my mental health. I was diagnosed with bipolar, or technically it was manic depressive, at the age of 18. So I've been in some form of therapy or some form of I've been dealing with this, actively dealing with this for 21 years. So I consider myself an expert on myself in that way, because I've been dealing with it so long. But I have a lot of those same day to day moments, but they're never just like a daydream. It is like I have to like talk myself down from them, fairly like like it's not just like a oh today sucks. I wish I had, and just like, obviously I don't picture, but I don't like just think about myself, hanging. I literally have, I spiral. And so like I've been I talked about this on the podcast last year. It was fresh. It was within a month or so of me starting the effort last year when we talked about this. When not you and I, but when Wes and I talked about this, I used to have not voices like you would hear voices, but I would negative self talk voices. So where, I like to explain it as being very Gollum and Smeagol. Nobody likes you, and nobody loves you, and being very uh abrasive and not self-deprecating in a funny way, in a very like talking myself into a stupor kind of mentality. And about a year ago, I just was like, I have to, when that starts to happen, I have to do something immediately so that I don't have the thoughts. I just have to like get rid of the thoughts. And I was successful. It took a long time, and it was like weird because it was my natural state in certain moments, like trying to fall asleep. I would like, after a bad day, stressful day, trying to fall asleep, my natural go-to thing would be like, you're gonna get fired tomorrow, everybody fucking hates you, you should just kill yourself. Like it was very like intense, and that's how I would like fall asleep. And so like it upset my sleep schedule because I didn't have the mental equivalent of sucking my thumb to go to bed. Like I didn't have that. I had to rewire stuff. So I did that. That took about 3 or 4 months to really get to push myself through it. And when I talked about it last year, I really wasn't there yet. I was in it. I wasn't through it. Now I'm through it, and it's weird because I get there's physical sensation that comes with depression. I don't know if you're how much depression you've had, so I don't know if you're aware of what I'm talking about.
I only know what I feel, so I don't know how to judge it versus what I'm supposed to
But
feel.
I mean, like, there is a heaviness to depression that I feel, like a physical, like lethargy. It's a gray day, and I'm just like, like it just everything feels like it's more of an effort, and it feels like you're wading through mud, like literally, like that's the physical aspect of it that matches that. So now I don't have this mental voice doing that to me, but I still have the physical feeling occasionally, and and it fucks with me because I'm like, I don't know what to do about it now that like I've gotten rid of the mental part, and some of it legitimately. I've mentioned this to you before. If it's gray outside or whatever, I'll get that way. And I'm working out a lot, so if I hit a few days where I don't get to work out, it can affect it. Certain dietary things can affect it because all of this is connected. But I'm aware of that. But there is just like this feeling of like trudginess that comes with depression.
Like Artax's death scene in Neverending Story.
The Artax is the big long sheep horse.
The horse.
Oh yes,
the regular horse who's in the swamp where it gets weighed down by depression, and he's like, "No, you can't let it get to you. The more it gets to you, the more you sink. The less you can move forward."
That is a great. I mean, I wouldn't say
that's what that's supposed to represent in that story.
It's been a very long time since I've seen it, and so like
you should see it because it's never ending.
Yeah, well, it's never ending, but it's also never playing here. So, not because I won't watch it, just because we haven't watched it. And is it appropriate for Logan?
Probably is with you with him. With scenes like that, they're depressing, but except for that scene, the rest of it would be.
Yeah. So
that's the one heavy scene, and the wolf's a little scary, but it's intended to be.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to ask you about. But it sounds like you have not had that type of suicidal.
I've not had that kind of deep depression. No. Yeah. But whenever I see like a questionnaire, it's like, "Have you thought about suicide?" I'm like, "Yeah, daily." Like, but thought about it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean ready to do it.
Right.
Once got a call from high school with that one of the kids' friends turned them in for talking about self-harm to the counselor, and it was amusing because that child of mine just started doing antidepressant medicine, and one of the listing on all antidepressants is for may cause thoughts of suicidality in children, people under 18. And at my company that made antidepressants, we were like, there's no reason that would be true. And when it happened to my kid, and I said, what's going on? He's like, I've always felt this way. The drugs made me confident enough to tell somebody for the first time. I'm like, that's probably more of what it is. It makes you good enough that you can share the feeling you've always had.
Yes.
So it looks like it's a new thing.
That makes sense. I had also heard recently, and it may have been Dear Old Dads, I could be wrong on that, that one of the things with depression medicine is similar to what you're saying if you're if you're not on medication and you're suicidal, it can feel kind of like a baseline. And then you take your medication, and especially if you're not taking it, if you haven't been taking it for very long, because depression medication takes a while it takes about a month typically, from my experience, to settle into your system in a way that is the intended effect. And when you get to that point, or when you're on the process of getting to that point, if you're getting there and you miss a dose, or or if you don't feel like it's being effective and you come off of it, then you all of a sudden, that baseline of suicidal depression that you were always in feels as though it's worse because you've returned to it. It's kind of like, like
you get used to the cold. You come in the house for long, it's warm. You go back outside, and it feels twice as cold.
Exactly.
Because you're not used to it anymore.
Right. And so that was, and you worded it better than I did, but that was the basic.
I'm a word guy. You're a word guy. You have damn masters.
I have a master's in Bayesian. Yeah. Okay. So back to the original thing that you had started to bring up, which was our responsibilities.
Yeah.
I have yet another hot take on this topic, and that is, as a parent, as a husband, this doesn't apply to Sarah, to Logan, to children and spouses. I don't think this applies to. However, to parents, and I said this in front of my parents to my therapist when I was 23 years old, so they are aware, and my dad kind of agreed, and that is, I don't think you have a responsibility to your parents to live, or your grandparents, or your aunts, or your uncles. I do have a responsibility to Logan, because I chose Logan. I did not choose my parents. I did not.
I think there's a difference in the level of responsibility because of that choice of not choosing.
Yeah, and I
I
think
think
that
you have obligations in every relationship that you have, and there are different levels of obligations.
no,
Yeah.
and I agree with that. And I will say, I come from parents, from a dad specifically, who doesn't get hung up on a lot of the shit that some people get hung up on. For example, like, you hear it all the time, but like, respect your elders, respect your parents. And my dad, my dad was raised by a single mother. His father left, and so my dad was very much like, no, I don't owe him shit. And he was always like, I owe my mother shit because she did so much for me beyond, you know, having me. And like, I think that about my parents. Like, I don't.
It may not be inherent just because of a genetic connection,
Right.
but there is
Yeah.
a bank account of what you've done for me my entire life. I owe back
Yeah.
some level. Like, why do I take care of my father through his cancer? Why am we going over there all the time to do things? Why does my wife do things?
Yeah.
Because we have a relationship and it's back and forth. And when in better times, they did it for us.
Yeah. I don't feel like I owe my parents anything for the fact that I'm here, the 18 years that they basically not only were legally, but I think morally obligated to take care of me. But they've done a whole bunch of shit since then. They've done extra shit that they didn't have to do in their lives. I have not been an easy child, and I'm aware of that. And they have never pretended like I was. But like, I owe them for letting me live with them till I was 29 years old and helping me get out of debt. And, a lot of things that, we hear it from, you always hear everybody knows somebody who's like, the minute they're 18, they're fucking out of my house and they're off my plans and it's like, okay, so you just had like an obligation. You just gave yourself an 18-year chore, and then as soon as it's done, you're like cutting it loose. It's fucking
Turned
weird.
out it wasn't as much fun as I thought it would be.
Yeah, but if I had an issue today and said to my parents, like, I need to come live with you, whether like, if something happened to Sarah and Logan and I had to go live with them, like, it would be fucking uncomfortable and nobody would be thrilled about it, right? But we would go there. Sarah's father would do the same for her if something happened to me. Like, these are and that's where, like,
frankly, he asks her all the time to come back home.
I don't really get the joke.
Doesn't need something to happen to you. He just wants her to leave you and come home.
Oh,
I'm the little voice in your head that says you're not good enough.
He loves me. He does. I'm a pain in the ass, but he's a pain in the ass too.
Yeah, I think it breaks down, like, obviously it's different in scale, but it's disappearing out of people's lives. So it's, if you feel like, would you be the asshole if you just said, I would be happier if I lived in Las Vegas. I'm going to pack all my bags and get on a plane and go to Las Vegas and not tell anyone.
Mm-hmm.
In what's your level of moral right or wrong in which situation with which relationship? To your friends, not the best thing to do, ghost all your friends, but you can. To your parents, worse, but still, you're able to go do that. To your wife and child, huge difference.
Yes.
To just get up and leave.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, you have to plan a way where your insurance still pays out.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on that. I'm on the same page. I also, it's been 15 years since I had that conversation with my parents and my therapist. And my therapist was like, what the fuck did he just say? And my dad was like, no, he's right. Like, he doesn't owe us. Like, I owe my parents, but not because they're my parents. I owe them because of who they are.
Yeah, the
And
relationship that you have,
right.
you've invested.
And so, and I think my dad, and I always try to make that clear because I don't want my dad to think like I don't think that I owe him. It's that I don't think children owe parents inherently. I think because he had a shitty father who he doesn't owe jack shit to. We all know somebody who's got one shitty parent, and there are a lot of like I hate to. So there's a YouTube reactor that I used to watch a lot, and I like him a lot. And he was reacting to one of Eminem's songs about his mother and his father. I think it was his father. No, it was about his mother, and he started saying the YouTube reactor said like, "Oh man, it's your mother. Like you can't react that way. It's your mother." And and Eminem has come back and kind of in recent years like said that he regrets making some of that stuff about his mother, but like his mother, like I'm not saying she deserved it, but he had every right to do it. And if he personally regrets it, I get it. But like I always find it bizarre that like I would instill on somebody else, oh, just because they ejaculated or they ovulated and sat with you for 9 months, you don't owe parents shit for
I mean, if they were your abuser, you certainly don't owe them as if
yes,
they were the most loving parent.
right, yeah. So something that came up this week that affected me mentally that I wanted to talk about as maybe a palate cleanser. What I was about to say. This is actually on the podcast. This I'm pretty sure you saw it. You responded to it. I had posted a video on Instagram and TikTok and a couple other spots about a abortion protester that I saw last week. And when I posted it, and this has happened a couple times with things that I've posted for this podcast, um, the vitriol in the comments was fucking with me, and so like I had a pit in my stomach every time I'd get like an alert on my phone, and it was not TikTok. TikTok kind of comes and goes real quick, so you'll get 1,000 views in an hour, and then you get nothing after that, so it's over. So it's still up on TikTok, but I deleted it off of Instagram because every 5 minutes the people were having this argument in my comments, and it was like we're slowly racking up the hits. But every time I saw the post, I was feeling sick to my
You never read
stomach.
the comments, even on your own stuff.
Yeah, but it's tough because you can't turn off notifications in all the ways that you need to. It's just it was a pain in the ass. So I ended up deleting the clip because I was like, this is
It
fucking
finally
with
went viral
my
and
head.
it.
It didn't go viral. It was 250 views and slowly climbing. Yeah. So anyway, so I think that was something that kind of came into play. By the time all this had happened, I had already set up. You and I had already, or I had already set the topic in Trello, and so I was already on the mental health and suicide thing, and then I was like, oh, this is a really difficult thing that I am still learning how to handle. It's the new frontier for me, mental health wise, which is how to use social media to promote and to interact with people, to be a modern person in society when I'm very susceptible to some of the mental health pitfalls of that social media. And so, like, I've posted some shit, and everyone in the comments, I actually thought that was a not particularly controversial take because I didn't say like, oh, what a psycho. I just was like, hey, is this a thing? And people were like, because I used the phrase, uh, pretending to look like something horrible happened inside, and that was an opening for everyone to be like, something horrible is happening inside. They're murdering
Pap
babies.
smears.
But so, do you find yourself having these mental health issues with social media? I feel like it's like I said, final frontier.
I mean, I've gotten to some things that start getting longer debates than I want to have, and I just say, well, I'm done replying. Maybe I'll just turn that off. But they're not real people to me. Just like you can't picture things in your head, I can easily unpicture people on the internet and say, I'm just not responding to that tweet anymore. Eventually it'll go away. And it comes back like months later, somebody else will reply, and I'm like,
I'm
I'll let
jealous.
somebody else have the argument because there's always someone willing to pick up the spear and fight for you if you don't reply. Someone
Yeah.
else will see you're not replying and
Well,
reply for you.
and I didn't reply to any of it because I thought if I don't reply, it'll die down. And someone picked up the spear, and I'm getting the alerts for the whole thing because it's on my. And I was like, ugh, this is not good for me. So I deleted it. I think that another thing that, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this to you, and I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but when we talk about mental health, and I think probably as much the suicide aspect of it as any other reason, we know about depression, whether it's chronic depression or uh, chemical imbalance depression, or just sometimes I don't know the word that it sounds insulting, but like situational meaning like I lost my job
episodes versus chronic episodes.
Right. I lost my job and now I'm depressed. Like we all know about those things, and obviously we also know about like PTSD, and there's a lot of suicide, and I think we're doing a bad job handling mental health when it comes to anything that creates PTSD. Like we don't do great on mental health, but we do really badly whether it's victimization. Like you're very tuned in with the gun violence and gun the I almost said pro-choice, not pro-choice. The gun control, yeah. You're very tuned in with that, and I'm sure, especially with Leah and the way that she's interacted with different victims, that you've got to be more aware than the average person about PTSD issues. And we don't handle veterans handle veterans PTSD well at all.
Shock.
And we have so many conditional things that could be handled that we don't bother to handle. And
I lost an uncle that I never had PTSD that was untreated. So my dad had twin older brothers, and I never knew one of them because he, since I'm going to say the war, I'm not trying to remember if he was in World War II or if he was in Vietnam. I mean, if he was in Korea, because he's older than my brother, my dad by a bit. So I think it was Korea though. And he was a lieutenant, I think, and he had to tell so many families that their child had died, losing people. And doing that is what my other uncle always said cracked him. And he moved to California to be away from the family because his mental health was so bad and he didn't want to be around everyone and be a burden on them. And I never met my uncle's twin brother. So he's my uncle, but I never met him my entire life. And he was alive as long as my other uncle was. They both died of a genetic disease, and they died like within a year or two of each other.
Yeah.
But I never met one of them. And it was because there was no treatment, in the 50s to deal with when he came back with. In the 50s and 60s, there was no idea of treating it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that I have a family member. He would be well over 100 by now, because I never met him. He died before I was born or conscious. I don't remember, but I knew his wife, and his wife would be about 115 or so, 110, something like that. But he had a lobotomy in the like early to mid 50s. And then I have, according to my grandfather, my dad's dad, the guy that I was previously talking shit about, he, according to him, had shock therapy. And so we had people that's the weird thing back then, is that even though we had really bad ways of handling it, people were actually trying to handle it. And there's a large, and I get it. We have a lot going on now. We have a lot of medications and stuff, but like it can be very difficult to access for a lot of people. And there was a long period of time where it was frowned upon to talk about mental health. And it was kind of like a, stiff upper lip kind of mentality. There was, you mentioned shell shock. And I believe that was in allusion to George Carlin's shell shock. And when if he, I'm pretty sure he says it in his thing, but people were considered
If we still called it
abandoners.
shell shock, we would still try to deal with it. Like if it was
Yes,
aggressive and it sounded bad, you
yes,
wanted to deal with it. And
right,
as we added syllables and made it post-traumatic stress disorder, it just didn't sound so bad, so people don't get help anymore.
right. Well, and yeah, but also during World War One, if you had shell shock and you left mid campaign or tried to or you be considered a deserter, and people were executed for PTSD, and and so we've not had a great history of mental health, and I think that that's kind of where I come down on, like, we need the fact that, okay, I'm obviously pretty left wing, but like the idea that I know, right? But the idea that we can't get behind supporting the fucking troops, it's better for everybody if we
Well,
support the troops mental health.
I think the right supports the troops until they leave service, and then when they're veterans, they no longer support them because they're not using them anymore. They support them because they want a steady supply of bodies to throw at a situation.
Sure, but like they also
They
are
don't
like the
care.
ones who are
It's
like
like
the
abortion.
troops,
Yeah, well,
like
it's like abortion.
yeah,
They don't care if you lose a pregnancy. Like, they won't give you medical care to not lose a pregnancy. They
right,
just don't want you to choose to end it.
right,
It's the same thing with troops. We don't care the condition of the troops. As long as we have bodies we can throw at brown people to kill them when we want to, that's what the right cares about. And when
yeah,
they're done not useful for that, we don't care about
right. I think that's it's just it's same thing with the 9/11 fund, which is actual physical ailment, like the fact that Jon Stewart every 5 years has to go before Congress and be like, "Are you fuckers serious?" Like, with the fact that we have to pull teeth to get any money for this kind of stuff seems crazy, with the amount of jingoistic nationalism that we have and patriotism that we have going on in one of our parties, and like nobody on the or no, there's plenty of people on the left that might have an issue with military, but nobody on the left is saying, well, don't give them health, don't properly take care of them when getting back. We're saying, like, take care of everybody. That might be a big thing, but like ultimately, the idea that we're not getting this accomplished is crazy to me.
it. I mean, that it even starts with the fact that we differentiate healthcare into three categories. You know,
Mhm.
dental, mental, and physical. Like, why are those three different things? It's all the same meat. Like,
Yeah,
shouldn't it just be healthcare? And why is private companies who make money, who don't give healthcare, who just sit in the middle and make money, why is that a thing we have?
yeah, yeah. So I think we're both saying that capitalism is the reason for the season.
Oh,
I will say, not that, and I'm not being serious, but one thing that I think is interesting is one of the number one days for suicide throughout the year is Christmas, and I
because
know that
religion is
if
bad.
I know that if we looked at it, it would feel like it was really a matter of feeling lonely or isolated on a holiday where you feel like you're not supposed to. But I also feel like the materialism and the capitalism of it all adds such an extra layer to it. And if we can blame capitalism, let's blame capitalism.
But I think, and to bring my gun violence back into it, as I always have to, it amazes me that when you say, look, that person had guns and killed 10 people, the right always says, no, 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 it's not about guns, it's about mental health. And you go, okay, let's give free mental health care. No, 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 we don't want to do that. It's like, you just said the reason you don't want to do something about guns is because that's not the cause. But you also don't want to do anything about mental health, which you said is the cause.
Yeah. I kind of, when somebody says the mental health care thing now, there are people who I think are good faith on
I
that
mean, it's
topic.
true that it's part of it.
Yes,
You're
absolutely.
sane and rational. You don't kill
Yeah.
10 people.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I wasn't going to argue that. I was going to say there's people there's the good faith, uh, the there's plenty of people I think, because there's a decent amount of the left that is pro gun to
Mm-hmm.
whatever degree. I mean, I'm not anti gun altogether. I just want common sense gun reform, right? Um, and I think that so that's not an exclusive. Like there are people who do want mental health being taken care of and want some, want to have some gun access for reasonable owners in certain circumstances. So those aren't mutually exclusive. That's so I will have the conversation when I think someone's in good faith, but I get more often than not somebody being like, if you post something that's anti or pro gun control or anti gun or whatever, however you want to word it, uh, there's always somebody who's like, it's a mental health issue. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to talk to them.
Yeah, and my response is always, then are you for free mental health care?
Yeah.
I mean, one quick question. Because if they say yes, say, okay, at least we can agree on that. Because you know what? That would be a great improvement.
Yeah.
But
I don't
to
get
say
into
it's a mental health issue and then say, no, I don't believe in mental health care being given for free, then you're saying that's not really your reason. That's just an argument you thought would win. It's not
yes.
the real reason that you.
Yeah.
It's not your real feeling.
Right. And I
Some of
don't
us
get
who
into
just
this.
like people being shot.
I don't get into this conversation with people I don't know at all. And so the people that say that to me, that I say are, I think, in bad faith, I know them. And so I just I don't bother to have I go, oh, okay. Or yeah. Or, occasionally it'll be a yeah, but I've kind of given up on some people having that conversation. But, all right. I have reasons. Okay. As far as mental health.
So have you had any close or relatively close friends or family who have opted out and taken their own lives?
Not that I'm aware of.
I was in a meeting once at work. We had a 2-day offsite as my company and another company just merged, and we're merging this committee that we were required to have, and we're waiting, and one of the people didn't show up. Young woman from the company we merged with didn't show up, and we're like, okay, we'll start without her, and we're like an hour into the meeting, and this is a long time ago. Instead of getting a call on their phone, my director got a page on his pager, left the room, was gone a couple minutes, came back and said, we have to cancel the meeting. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? It's a 2-day meeting. And he said, I just got a call from the Durham Sheriff's Department. They just found the person who was missing. She had gone out and bought a gun, parked in front of her ex-fiance's house, who was now dating someone else, and shot herself in front of his house. And she had been going through this, obviously a stressful time, but she had been talking about for weeks how there's this promotion that she's trying to get in the shakeout of our merger that would super increase her salary and allow her to move to Raleigh so she wouldn't have to see her ex-fiance all the time. They live in the same neighborhood. She saw them all the time. It's like, I can't wait to get this promotion. And it had been months and it just wasn't coming through because the system was moving so slowly. And there was one person who was at our meeting who was standing in the way of it, like actively campaigning against her getting it because it would put them at the same level, and this other person would have been promoted up from like an admin position to this big jump in thing, but it kind of aligned for what she was doing as an admin at the other company. So that person lost it. She was just hysterical, crying and ran out of the room because she probably correctly assumed she had a part to play in the mental state of our coworker.
Yeah.
Lucky for her, we had non-employee members of this committee. It was an ethics committee, and one of them was a chaplain at hospitals dealing with this kind of thing. So she ran out and kind of consoled her right there. I was very close with the person. Like she and I were in equivalent positions at our current positions, and I worked a lot with her. So I was kind of shaken. I went out and drove around and went to the places of employment of lots of my female friends that worked in RTP who were outside of the mainstream like she was, or didn't quite fit in, and like pulled them out of their offices to hug them and talk to them, make sure they're okay, like check in with people who might also be thinking this in their head. Where I was, and I think it was like a week later, I was watching a commercial and I started to cry, and my wife was like, "Oh, finally, you're crying about this." And when I went back to work the next day, I was like a completely different person, and people were coming over saying, "Oh, we were so worried about you the last week because you've so not been yourself." Like I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me until I cried at a Hallmark ad or something.
Yes, yeah.
But,
I'm sorry.
but that's what always solidified in my head how much damage you do to other people around you, even people like casual coworkers. When something like that happens. So it has to be, I think, a really thought out well thought decision to choose to do that,
Right.
as opposed to a spur of the moment. I don't feel good.
I do
And I
want.
know I don't blame someone who in the spur of the moment can't control their thoughts. But I just
Right.
mean like what I feel is like a supportable, rational choice to make needs to take that into account.
I want to add in to, so when you started telling the story, I thought you were going to, because you said she parked outside of her boyfriend's house. I was worried you were about to talk about a murder suicide, and that is a huge part of why I'm in favor of people of destigmatizing it in certain circumstances, because every time I hear about a murder suicide, I think, why didn't you just take your own, like, and I don't mean that callously. I'm
Right.
sure I'm not saying that correctly, but
Yeah.
like say, I don't know if Sarah knew them. I think she knew that a girl she knew from high school, her mother, the stepfather, came home and killed the mother and then killed himself. They were getting divorced, or she cheated, or he had cheated, or something. I forget. And it was all over the news. It was, her best friend was neighbors with the person. She knew the girl that was the daughter. It was but this was when we knew each other, so she hadn't known the girl for a while, or she hadn't seen her in a while. But she, certain situation, and I remember thinking, like, if you're in that circumstance, and maybe this is me as a person who has dealt with suicidal depression to such a great extent, my thought was just like, it has never been about punishing another person.
Yeah, but
And
maybe
so,
that person had the opposite though. They weren't as suicidal as they were murderous, but they didn't
very,
want to.
very
They didn't
possible.
want to deal with the aftermath of murdering. So I'm going to murder my spouse, but I don't want to deal with what comes next. So I'm going to kill myself so I don't have to.
I would guess that if you're in that situation, more than half the time there, it's because of what you just said.
I mean, when I think about it, whenever my wife and I see something about a spouse murdering a spouse, depending which spouse it was, one or the other of us will say, "You can divorce me. Like, that's fine. I won't say no if it's a choice."
Yeah, no, I agree. But I just, that's another big part of the reason why I think, like, same thing with, I I get that there's a whole bunch of other things, and so this is an oversimplification, just the way you said they're probably murderous and then they kill themselves to get out of consequences. Every time we hear about a mass shooting, not that they always end up dead, but very often they end up dead. A lot of times by their own hand, or they're fully aware that's going to happen. You just, it would literally be better if you just killed yourself, and I don't mean that. And I feel like I'm sounding evil, but I don't mean it in a callous way.
I remember one time listening to Howard Stern on the radio, way back in the old days when he was still in terrestrial radio, and somebody had called in and said that they have pederast fantasies, like the fantasies of sexually assaulting children, and he was like, "Go to the Brooklyn Bridge and jump off it." He goes, he goes, go get mental help, go try to deal with it. But if you feel like you're breaking down and you're going to do it and you can't help yourself, be a hero. Save a child by jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah. And it was like this horrific thing that he was recommending them kill themselves, but he's like, he's right. I mean, get mental health. Check yourself into a hospital is the first thing to do. Yeah. But I mean, if you feel like over years I'm going to give in, I can't do it, it's a better decision to hurt yourself and not someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have bodily autonomy to do that.
Let's see. I have a couple other. So one thing I want to talk about is methods of treatment. So I'll talk.
Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah. No treatment, not methods of completion. I am a big believer in the holistic approach, not meaning like approaching treating as much of it as possible. So I think that there is a lot, I think that when you're in a suicidal depression, it's very often an emergency state, and what you need in an emergency state is a mental health professional, and you need sometimes it's two mental health professionals. In my experience, there's usually a talk therapist and then there is a psychiatrist who is there to help you get medicated properly during that. And sometimes the medication you need to get out of that emergency state is not the medication you'll need long term. But I think that that's like something that people need to realize is that like a lot of it is temporary, and so you need to like be able to know how to reach out and get that proper help. But I do not want people to think that I am saying that it is all preventable, but I do think that there is an optimization that we can do and say like, okay, like if I start to feel a little gloomy, depression in that like trudging feeling that I described earlier, which to me is very different than suicidal depression. They are connected, but they are not the same necessarily. My go-to thing is I'll go to the gym. The certain, you, and some of that is learning about yourself, but gym, diet, those things can help curb slight. They can help optimize your chances, but that's not really to deal with suicidal depression. That's more to deal with low levels or beginnings of depression. Um, but medication and talk therapy are really great ways of handling emergency situations. Um, and sometimes long term, like the first few, I was in therapy and on medication for the better part of 10 years. And it was great to work through and get the different processes that I needed. I would get the therapist to help me come up with different strategies and things. So I'm a very big advocate, not only on taking care of yourself and learning, and part of this is because I've now been dealing with it so long. I know a lot about myself, and getting there was doctors and having the time to be able to get there was doctors and medication. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about methods of treatment. Um, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that part?
I'm not a healthcare professional.
Yeah, I will say that none of my advice is healthcare professional. Although my advice,
to a healthcare professional.
talk to a healthcare professional, and they will help you learn. And we're all different, and that's one of the things you learn with a therapist. And you have to give both medication and therapy they're a process. And so as you're a different person than I am, and every listener here is different. We're going to have a different process, each of us. The therapist can help you wade through that process, and that can take a little bit of time, and it can get frustrating, but ultimately it's getting to know yourself and getting to treat yourself with the help of a therapist and medication is really important if you're in the situation. So I don't at this moment have the links, but I'm going to include um, links to suicide prevention information, mental health resources information, as well as I'm totally spacing on what it is, but there was a suicide hotline, like there's 911. There was one specifically for mental health crisis.
Yeah, if you Google any information about suicide, it comes up. Like I went to Bing, AI thing to say, how many facts about suicide, and the first thing that came up was suicide hotline. Like before it even gave me an answer.
Right, but there was one that was very specifically 988. So if you're in any kind of mental health crisis, 988 is it's the alternative to 911 because and I don't mean this disparagingly, but 911 is for other kinds of emergencies, and they're not necessarily the best equipped for mental health emergencies, whereas 988 is, and that will help you to get the right people to you and get yourself into a better situation.
And so I'll hit my side of the street. If you are not currently in a life or death situation, but you feel that you need mental health support, and you're someone like me who doesn't want to end up getting a therapist who will say, let's pray on it, which happens in the South sometimes. There is an organization called the Secular Therapy Project. Their URL is just seculartherapy.org, where basically you put in where you live and it will help identify therapists in your area or who do remote, who are just dedicated to non-religious therapy, data-driven, evidence-driven. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are atheists or anything. Like, they can be religious, but they don't use it in their therapy, or they
Right.
pledge they don't do it in their therapy, so they're in the system. And if you are a therapist who does that, you can also go on their site to apply to be listed on their site as
Yeah.
a potential therapist.
Yeah, I will say I've been lucky. I have not had any mental health professionals ever really get religious with me or push religion on me. I have had other people in my life kind of say, like, pray on it. You need Jesus.
I
You
thought
need
it would
to,
help you. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I was like,
But
eat some gefilte fish, try some bagels and lox. You'll feel better.
yeah,
Jewish therapy.
so you told me. You told me, oh, if you cut the tip of skin off your dick, then everything will get better. But it didn't. It got infected. Those are the kind of jokes that I'll make on this episode because I feel like circumcision jokes are
always
okay.
good. Dick joke is always good.
Yeah. So anyway,
Anti-Semitic dick jokes are always good. That's what he does.
yeah, anti-Semitic dick jokes. That's going to be the name of my autobiography. Anyway, so 988 is the suicide, or sorry, it's the crisis, the mental health crisis line. I will include more stuff on the show notes, including the secular therapy project. It's really important. I'm gonna, I do want to kind of do this every year, do some episode on this every year. This was, pretty different than last year's, but I think that it's a topic that I really think is important. And I do hope that nobody felt that we were being too flippant about this, because we do both genuinely take this seriously. It's a weird spot to start plugging, but I'm gonna say, if you are watching us on YouTube, please hit like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that good stuff. If you are listening to us on any free podcast service, whether it be Apple or Spotify or other ones that I don't know, Google Play,
or just if you tell your Echo to play Big Stuff Podcast, talk about the Big Stuff Podcast, your Echo will burst forth with our lovely dulcet tones.
Yes. And so if you do that, if you wanted to subscribe, it's always helpful. It will, get us, subscribe or follow, depending on the terminology they use. It will get you the episodes downloaded automatically, which helps us, and hopefully you're enjoying the show and learning something from us. If for some reason you are not happy with just liking and subscribing, and you say, hey, how can I support this podcast in another way, in a more financial based way, you can go to patreon.com/talking about the big stuff, which will also be linked in the show notes. It always is. And you can support us. We have two different levels right now. It's a $3 patron feed, that's just the uncensored version, and it's about 4 days early every week. And then there's a $10 version, which really, the $10 version, there's a few extra key features, some stuff that we didn't think we could give away for $3, like stories and stuff, and that's about it. That's basically Matthew's OnlyFans. So anyway,
maybe one day I can afford to not wear earbuds that are 20 years old and don't even have any cushioning on them.
Yeah, maybe. So we will talk to you next week. Matthew, you got anything?
Just thanks for being here while we were talking about the biggest stuff of all, life and death.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. The preceding podcast has been a Chocolate Diamond Media LLC production. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.